Hello gay frogs, I'm a snake person, and you're watching a government cover-up of what I ate for breakfast. This is Alex Jones. He's on a holy crusade to destroy every liberal in the lands between. There's over 150 bosses in Elden Ring, and I've set out to kill each and every one of them. Give them all a comprehensive score from 1 to 10. Well, I'm not here to waste your time, so let's get started. I have a couple quick ground rules I want to set up first. A boss is defined as anything with a health bar that comes on screen when you're in range. If there's no boss bar, it's not a boss. I'll be ranking every boss in order of when I beat them during the playthrough. Bosses that are exactly or essentially the same, such as multiple instances of a knight's cavalry, will not be ranked separately, however subsequent fights will be taken into account for the ranking. Bosses that are pretty much the same but with some key differences like Agil and Smarag will count separately. Duo bosses that pull 2 already used bosses will count separately, like the Miranda the Blighted Bloom plus Omen Killer fight. I'll be giving each boss 4 arbitrary numbers: a fun rating, a difficulty rating, a badass rating, and an overall score. Remember that if you disagree with any of these, you must be wrong, because you can always trust anyone that posts something on the internet. A quick major spoiler disclaimer: if you haven't played Elden Ring yet, go do that before you watch this video. It's a very good game, and you don't want to be spoiled. Just a normal guy. It doesn't make for a badass fight at all, but I can't knock him too hard as a tutorial boss. He does his job fine, I guess, but couldn't there have been something at least a little cooler? He's a cool-looking guy, but he's pretty easy to just stagger to death. Before you figured that out, though, it's a cool-ass fight for the level you're at. I was never a fan of multi-target bosses, and this is that cranked to the max. You have to fight 2 demi-human chiefs and 6 regular demi-humans all at once. They all have somewhat low health, but that many guys at once is just too fucking many. Every troll is pretty fun to dodge around, although as a boss they're kinda held back by the fact that they're fucking everywhere. They're big and intimidating, sure, but you've already killed a few by the time you made it here. Probably your first truly intimidating boss encounter. A big enemy with an equally large health bar. Its difficulty doesn't drag it down in the badass department like so many other early game bosses. This boss helps to show that without fun or an X factor, a boss cannot stand on difficulty alone. This is one of the harder early game bosses, but just because its dodge timing can take an attempt or 2 to get used to. Other than that, it's just a weird looking gargoyle statue, meh. I also hate the annoying little shit stains that infest these dungeons. It may be a reused normal enemy, but it's a really badass normal enemy. Unfortunately, this one is really susceptible to just being spammed at, making for a very uninteresting boss. Patches only gets this good of a score because he's a funny dude. This was a pretty fun fight. He wasn't too easy to stagger, so it took some effort and careful dodging to get a moment to rest and heal. But a lot of his dodge timings on attacks were pretty lenient too. Overall, well put together fight. Mid as hell boss. The golems are well-designed enemies, and taking one down makes you feel really cool, though. Except for the ones with bows, but that one's not a boss, so I'm not ranking it. He's cool, instant transmissioning around and shit, but it can be pretty frustrating when you're just trying to find an opening, and he jumps back every time you take a swing. At least his health isn't too high, so being so nimble doesn't make it overly annoying. A quick and easy but pretty fun boss fight. Has a small health bar, but the skeletons it raises are one of the only examples of a multi-target boss done right. The Mariner itself only attacks if you get close, so you can focus on the skellies when there's too many of them around. It's a pretty dynamic fight too, since the Mariner teleports to different locations from time to time. However, you can use sound cues to figure out where it went. Rip deaf people. What a masterpiece of a boss. Very difficult, especially for newer players. However, Marga isn't an adapt or else type boss. He's designed in such a way that any strategy works on him. Maybe some are more effective than others, but the first main story boss doesn't discourage any type of playstyle, which I like. Marga balances fairness and difficulty probably better than any other boss in the game. Probably the first dragon you'll encounter, and a hard-hitting one at that. Once it falls from the sky and the music kicks in, you'll be shitting yourself already. Although, once you figure out how to fight him, it's not hard and pretty forgiving. The Tree Sentinel is meant to teach you the value of running the fuck away, and it does a damn good job. This is just about the first non-tutorial enemy, and it will kick your shit in if you try to fight it too early. Although it's not that hard once you come back later. This would have been a better fight if it wasn't so long. Horseback combat is just boring, although it could have been more fun if it was more fast-paced. Staying on foot works fine as well, but there's going to be a lot of waiting for him to decide to use a move that you can actually punish on foot, as opposed to taking turns chasing each other down like on horseback. Cool looking, but just kind of easy. Maybe it's just my holy damage build, but it went down in a few hits. This is just a normal enemy that you've probably already seen before at Castle Morn. Nothing special. Normally I'm fine with reusing enemies as bosses, but this one was just not intimidating. This is just a goddamn flower. These flowers are boring to fight too, so go fuck yourself. Breaking, crazed Alex Jones assaults large bear with scythe. For real, bosses that are way bigger than you are always cool to varying degrees. Pretty decent boss fight, I can't complain. Has a little of everything I like about bosses. Some tight dodge windows, not too easy to stance break. Getting hit is pretty punishing, but it's not impossible to recover, etc. A quite well-designed enemy overall. It works well as a boss, and it works well as a normal enemy in the late game. Compare it to something like the Scaly Misbegotten, and there's no contest as to which makes for the more intimidating and interesting boss fight. Strikes a very good balance between difficulty and fairness. This isn't a particularly easy boss fight, but it has some specific weaknesses like low poise that you can exploit. Interesting moves to dodge help too. I feel like the Erdtree avatars are less than the sum of their parts. Maybe they had a more varied and interesting moveset, they'd be better, but as it stands they're kinda bland, and the badass factor wears off after you kill like a dozen of them. I would call Godric the Grafted the second easiest story boss, and I would have liked him to be at least a bit harder. Although it is a fun fight and this guy is badass as fuck. He has an entire dragon head on his arm. I like how Marga was a fuck off, go explore and then come back. But I feel like Godric should have been harder than Marga as a, a lead up of sorts. Deceptively difficult fight. His hitboxes are massive and some of his timings are brutal. Don't even think about outranging him either. I found myself having to leave and come back to this fight multiple times in multiple areas. This boss appears a total of 4 + 1 times throughout the lands between, and he doesn't change at all. But he does get power crept through damage and health. I actually like this, since by the time you're fighting the strongest version of him, you fought him enough to take him down, even though he can two-shot you easily. This thing can have a massively intimidating health bar when you first meet it, but it can still technically be defeated by any level player. Its attacks are all big, but telegraphed and easily punishable if you can dodge them. Although you definitely want to come back later if your damage isn't good enough. Also, this boss is used so many times throughout the game, the badass impact starts really wearing off. I just fucking hate this fight. He's hard and he's cool looking, but fuck the Crucible Knights. They have infinite goddamn poise, and their health is way too fucking high. All their attacks have bullshit ass timing, and they can catch up to you with a thrust just in case you got hit fucking once and need to heal. This one in particular has a tail that can fuck up what should be a guaranteed punish and Uno reverse it into a you're fucked scenario. Difficulty and badassery are tools to make a fight more fun. A low fun rating means a low overall rating. Burn in hell, Crucible Knights. A generally inoffensive fight, although they are very averse to leaving the poisoned bog. This either makes you have to get poisoned during the fight, or you have to hang back and fire off ranged attacks waiting for them to approach. Getting poisoned is not fun, and basically puts you on a death timer, and having to just sit there and wait for an approach is boring. This is just another fucking Crucible Knight fight, and you know how I feel about those walking mistakes. And once the knight is dead, if you don't kill the snail in time, you have to fight it again! I know now that you can kill the snail without even fighting the knight, but I did not know that when I beat the boss, so my verdict does not change. Fuck you. This isn't so much of a boss by the time you have a chance at beating it as it is a look how far you've come moment. At the very start, it's basically just a forced loss. This boss is hard to rank since it sets out to do something completely different from the other bosses. Haha balls. Overall just another troll, although this one has magic. Not the worst, but it's very easy to just keep your distance for some attacks and then just close in and spam them out. Especially if you have projectiles yourself or a larger weapon. One of the shittiest enemies in the game. Seriously, fuck these assholes. A lot of their attacks give you very little time to react and have really mean timings. They're also a good example of an enemy with way too much poise. I couldn't make it stagger once with my build, and I pumped enough strong moves into it to stance break a fucking Crucible Knight. Basically just a harder, bluer Agil. Which isn't a bad thing, necessarily. The extra magic attacks are really similar to the existing breath attacks, though, so they don't add much to the fight other than the color blue. You'll have to pick off the dogs before you engage the Omen Killer itself, but that's pretty easy to do with ranged attacks. As for the actual boss, it's a pretty basic but well put together fight. No bullshit other than the bit dogs. Clean match. Generally cool boss, although it can be a pain in the ass to hit, and some of its magic moves are annoying to dodge. A small health bar helps the fight to not drag on though. Loretta is a boss that constantly keeps you on your toes and your heart pumping. She gives you very little time to breathe, but in the way that makes you look for weak points and rewards you for finding them, and has hard but predictable dodge windows. Probably the easiest boss in the entire game. Has less poise than Soldier of Godric, gets stance broken by a light breeze, and a health bar equal to that of an ice hotel in a Nevada summer. There's something to be said about the power trip you get by absolutely ripping and tearing this MF, but Elden Ring isn't really a power trip game as much as it is a you will get fucking annihilated game. It is just a death bird but with like ice slapped onto it. Although it does look cooler, I guess. The reason the difficulty is question marks is because the one I fought from Liurnia randomly fucking killed itself. Like full on insta dead from 3/4 health somehow. I have no idea what the hell happened. I probably can't recreate it. It was flying up and died at like the apex of its flight when it was right near the Academy Bridge. Someone who's like better at this shit than me, I would appreciate it if you documented this and told me what the fuck happened. On an actual rating note, some of them have ridiculous amounts of health for some reason. Really all they did was take a perfectly good boss, slap right in the name, and make it bad. I like the idea behind this boss. It takes very little damage from anything but strike weapons until you break its stance. However, it ends up being more of, alright, do I have a good strike weapon? No? I guess I'm fucked then. A decently average but extremely overused boss fight. When you beat one, the others are all just easy now. I think it would have been better if they stuck with like just a couple, or at least changed them in any significant way between appearances. Her first phase is interesting, but gets annoying on subsequent attempts. Her second phase really forces you to understand how her spells work and how to exploit their weaknesses, since she can punish you with massive damage. The giant summon is a temporary and avoidable distraction, thumbs up. But the wolves and Bloodhound Knight just swarm you and leave you no time to deal with Renala or dodge her spells, and the dragon is just a nuke button if your positioning is off. It is really annoying trying to dodge melee attacks from one of them while the other all just sprays its crystal jizz everywhere. A lot of the time, only one of those is going to be in view, so you have no idea if the other one is about to attack you. Definitely the most unique dragon in terms of moveset. Unfortunately, it has the annoying tendency to one-tap your horse, which means you have to spend an unnecessary amount of time going through menus to resummon it, increasing the chance that you'll get one-tapped yourself. Trust me, you do not want to get off your horse for this boss, or you will get insta-killed by its rot breath. It also tends to get up on hills and the surrounding terrain, which makes it hard to see while hitting its legs and hard to dodge its rot breath. 1 is annoying but doable, 2 is fucking cruel. Neither of them will ever stop attacking, and if they stagger their attacks right, which they will, you have a very high chance of getting spit roasted in a certain death combo. My main complaint about this boss is that the arena is just too small. I wish I had a bit more space to run around them and hit them in the back without getting attacked by the other one. Remember how much I fucking hate Crucible Knights? Now it has a friend. Same things I said about the Crucible Knights in Limgrave apply here, but this time with all the shit I say about duo bosses. At least fighting the Misbegotten is fun, I guess. This motherfucker literally has the power to stop stars from spinning, and he uses it to make sure his horse isn't strained. I prefer doing this fight with the summons because after all, what's a festival without some jolly cooperation? The only complaints I have here is that his damage is so high that you're kind of forced to keep your distance a lot of the time. That wasn't much of an issue with my specific build. The fun, difficulty, and badass factor of the Mimic tier are entirely dependent on your own build. If you're using a greatsword, maybe the Mimic is fun to dodge around. If you're using Rivers of Blood, maybe it's annoying and you have to keep your distance. Maybe it's wearing badass armor, maybe it's naked. It's a complete wild card. Really cool concept. My Mimic tier would have pretty good ratings across the board for what it's worth. It's so big that when you're lodged inside its crotch, which is the best place to not get hit, you can't really tell what it's about to do, so it's hard to dodge accordingly. This is exacerbated by being incredibly and unnecessarily punishing. Any of its attacks can very easily two-shot you from full health, and gives you no chance to heal. It also has a big hitbox in its crotch that you can't walk or roll through, but it doesn't take damage, which gets in the way surprisingly often. Oh, and the one on the Lake of Rock can suck a fucking dick. At least it's not horribly unfun as a duo boss. Their health is low enough that one is usually dead before the other makes itself an issue, but that also means it's extremely easy. A fair but not super fun boss. It doesn't have any random bullshit that can just insta-kill you, but all its moves are somewhat easy to dodge once you learn them enough. But that's just the first one. They scale insanely hard, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. After you've already proven yourself against the first one, you should be able to handle increasingly harder versions. I very much dislike these assholes. Large, lingering hitboxes with high damage, along with poise just too high for most attacks to be interrupted. As it happens, one blast from Exike's Decay rots these guys, and it lasts long enough to take out their whole health bar. What you do with that information is none of my business. Absolutely fucking dog shit. One of these would be bad enough, two will make you want to pull a Horolu on your drywall. I had to leave and come back way later, not because of difficulty, but because I was just that pissed off. My advice lightning, I spammed them out pretty easily with Honed Bolt. Hey, Editing Toga here. I wanted to talk a bit more about these two than I had originally written after watching this video, which you should also watch. It is very good, link in description. This is the best duo boss in Elden Ring. Not the highest bar, but I think it's an interesting fight to look at. The Omen Killer is a standard enemy with quick movement that isn't always easy to stagger, and he does big damage if you're not careful. Because of the highly mobile nature of the Omen Killer, your attention will be on him for pretty much the entire fight. The flower is completely immobile, and it likes to spam attacks that cause poison buildup rather than doing damage. This works because the Omen Killer will usually have your back to the flower, so you can't see what it's doing. When you walk into the cloud and see the poison bar up, you know you have to find a way to dodge around the Omen Killer to escape, but there's no immediate danger of taking damage. The flower's laser attack appears on the floor long before it starts hitting too, so that's reasonable to dodge while locked onto the Omen Killer. Compare this to the AoE poison breath attack of the Valiant Gargoyle fight, which comes out of nowhere and immediately starts doing damage. However, that's where the good parts of this fight end. An Omen Killer wasn't a terrible choice, but there definitely could have been a better enemy here, preferably something along the lines of a Grave Warden duelist. Omen Killers aren't hard to stance break, and they have low health, so it's gonna be dead pretty quickly. Once the Omen Killer is dead, you have to fight the flower one-on-one too, and flowers are just fucking boring to fight against. Seems like a recurring theme here that all the Remembrance bosses are fucking awesome, huh? Estelle has some really hard moves to dodge, and some that seem like guaranteed damage unless you figure out how to dodge them. And everything he deals does massive damage, even if it's not a one-shot Germa, but once you learn his patterns, this is one of the most rewarding bosses to dodge. He has a massive blind spots to most of his normal attacks behind his head. Very little can actually hit you from there. But you're never totally safe fighting Estelle. This boss is so dog shit. You would expect it to be the same as the previous Black Knife Assassins and be easy to spam out, right? No. No, she has ridiculous poise for her speed, does way too much damage, and can definitely one-shot you easily out of nowhere, and has basically Bloodhound Step on top of all of that. Also a fucked up health bar. I swear she has almost as much health as fucking Estelle. I fucking hate this fight. Maybe more than any of the others so far, except Crucible Knights. Fuck you. Since I hate this goddamn fight so much, here's my official toga guide to beating this bitch. First, you'll want any heavy weapon. Great sword, great axe, colossal sword, it don't matter. That's pretty much all that's going to be able to stagger her. Make sure your vigor is good enough to take a few hits, otherwise you're just going to fucking die. Over and over. The general strategy is to run around the whole fight. Never stop moving in the opposite direction of Alecto. Only go for a punish on her most laggy moves. Usually a running R2 does the trick. Don't approach. Make her come to you. Once you've gotten a hit, start running again. Usually she tends to jump away if she's hit with a strong move, so hold down if you're locked on to make sure you don't run right into where she ends up. Sometimes she uses a short-range knife poke, which can be ran away from, given your spacing isn't dog shit. If you need to heal, do not get greedy. If you go for a risky punish, or any punish, you'll probably die, so if you're low on health, run until you have ample time to chug a flask. One time in my first playthrough, I was using a Giant's Crusher. I managed to completely stunlock her in a corner between some rocks, but I can't quite recreate it, so just keep that in the back of your mind. There is a cliff inside the Everjail Arena, which you can fall off, but I don't know if you can push Alecto off. Easier than the dogs in the ruins outside. The better of the two Godskin enemies, at least. It's easier to get into the dance with him than it is with the Noble, although the black flame he throws whenever your thumb so much as brushes the heal button is annoying, and a lot of his moves are difficult to punish or completely unpunishable. I don't like Deathblight. I think it's a shitty game mechanic that encourages unfun play. It builds up too quickly and it builds back down too slowly. This just means you'll run around not engaging until your Deathblight bar is empty again, which can take quite a while. Nothing else particularly shitty about this boss, though. It has 2 lock-on points, neither of which are all that practical, so just stick with free camming this boss. It has a ton of health, making any fight with it drag on for a while. His attacks are also wide, with odd multiple hitboxes that make dodging them weird. Otherwise inoffensive and pretty fucking cool. This boss really benefits from being in a more open area. The more enclosed the space, the easier it is to get around her blind spots and kill her pretty easily. This is really just a Godric victory lap. He has the same moveset, but with health scaled to the level of the Altus Plateau and no Dragonheart phase. I can't call a Godric fight bad per se, but it's nothing special. This guy is so fucking cool. All his moves are difficult but fun to dodge, and his extreme poise and health bar means he's not going down easy. My only issue with this fight is the Scarlet Rot is annoying and makes you want to disengage until you're rotless again if you do get hit. The arena is also a bit too big, making this easy and not forcing you to confront him ever. Pretty good as far as ultra hard bosses go. You will very much get your ass beaten by this boss, and you will come out the other end feeling like a better person. No bullshit here, it's just honest difficulty. Honestly, disappointingly easy. His moves are all easy to dodge and don't do all that much damage, easy to outrange, and doesn't make you work for your healing. This would be just fine on a normal boss, but this is the first Elden Lord we're shitting on. Come on. Amazing boss. While your first encounter with Margot was to teach you game mechanics and how to not suck ass, Morgot is a culmination of everything you learned and feels fucking awesome. A lot of his moves are essentially the same, but amped up and harder, like his cane attacks now causing bleed, or him throwing 3 knives instead of 1. He also has some new moves too, don't worry. I truly love Morgot through and through. And maybe make the actual boss fun and hard instead of just plopping down 2 of those motherfucking bleed dogs and calling it a boss battle. This guy's a fucking loser. This is a very difficult and well put together fight. The only thing dragging it down slightly is the circumstances. You may have heard of this Mog guy before, from some NPC or item descriptions, but you have no idea why the fuck he's down here, and you get no context as to who he is. This does get better later on, spoilers, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. I feel like this first Mog encounter needs a bit more context to it. This is just 2 of an extremely common enemy in Leyndell. You would have found multiple groups of 2 Omen if you spent any amount of time in the Shunning Grounds. I genuinely can't remember if I've fought one of these before. That's how lame they are. They're very easily stun locked and have low health. They have a few moves with hyper armor, but the hyper armor they do have is quite weak. Worst boss in the entire fucking game. Do not fight these jackasses unless you have the ultimate cheese tactic. This was the first boss that I used ashes for because it's just that fucking bad. I've already talked about how much I hate Crucible Knights. This is just 2 of them in a relatively small room. Shout out to Lutel the Headless for the assist. This is just 2 basic enemies from Caelid. Fuck off. This thing does way too much damage. If you get hit once, you'll have to heal, and sometimes they can just one-shot you. I'm not talking about coming just out of Limgrave here. No, I'm talking about after beating King Morgot. Just please have its damage output for real. Fuck. It is not fun getting pestered by some pussy ass throwing shit at you while you're trying to fight a fucking boss. This is one of the more egregious examples of an annoying dual boss that does not bring anything to the table because of having one more enemy. Not a dual boss, just a clean rot knight, and then another clean rot knight when the first one dies. Really lame, kinda boring, they're just understated clean rot knights. You would think this is even worse than the Crystallian duos, but that's the weird part, it's easier. The way the AI works is that one enemy tends to lock onto you and the others in a group hang back, especially with bosses. I think this is like elevated or something with more than 2 bosses, since during this fight the only thing the other 2 Crystallians would do while I was fighting one of them was just like spin around away from me. I don't know what to make of this fight. On one hand, it's easy and as simple as just pressing R1 a few times, but it also has a cool atmosphere. Like, this is just a normal dude hanging out with his pet undead snail whose home you invaded. Weird fight. I hate perfumers. This fight sucks. You basically have to focus Tricia at first if you don't want the fight dragged on for fucking years. But the misbegotten asshole never stops flailing around having a tantrum, so any damage you take while killing Tricia, and you will take damage, is too much of a pain in the ass to heal. Bosses that make you work for healing in a good way do it by not being bullshit. Fuck duo bosses. Technically, this is just another instance of the Bell-Bearing Hunter, and not even the strongest one at that, but I just can't resist the opportunity to keep sucking Elimer's dick. This fight is just such a cool culmination of all the previous ones. You finally see the man behind the mysterious, night-bound, bell-bearing hunter, and he has some juicy details about him from item descriptions. It's, also a really fun and difficult fight, just like all the other bell-bearing hunter fights. The Godskin Noble is just awkward to fight. Its moves are weird and can sometimes feel janky. Its damage is all over the place. Its poise can either seem laughably low or strangely high. It just has a little too much health. This is one of the baddest ass fights in the whole game, but it's also the easiest story boss by a long shot. It's like just trivial to just infinitely stun Lockreicher with L2 into fully charged R2, which is a real shame since this fight is metal as fuck. A decent, inoffensive boss. Its health is, like, high, but not to the point that this fight is grueling. Its hitboxes are big, but manageable. Its damage is decent, but not bullshit. It is a normal Ancestor Spirit, but with some attacks that are blue and the ability to heal. It's genuinely hard to tell whether or not its health or damage are any different from the base Ancestor Spirit at all. Why does this thing have a remembrance? Why do I have to make a stand stats page for it? This boss isn't the absolute worst, but as per usual for duo bosses, the fact that there's two is just obnoxious. They tend to not attack both at once, which is good, but their poison breath attack can come out of nowhere when you're focusing on the other one, and if you're unlucky, you just get poisoned and there's nothing you can do about it. The fact that the other doesn't attack until the first is at half health is good, but at that point, why not just send them in one after the other? What's the point of making this a duo boss? God damn it, not another one. At least this one doesn't have a shield, so you can just spam spells at them if you're an interfaith build. An interesting boss consisting of 3 waves, 1 random guy, Rogier, then 2 random guys and a League of Legends player. Some of the random guys are easier than others, obviously, so the difficulty is hard to say exactly. It's a neat concept and much easier to deal with and control 3 normal NPCs than 2 or more boss enemies. I don't have a lot to say about Fortisax that I haven't already said about Lanciax, other than how fucking badass he is. This fight is fucking awesome, which really helps it out. Borealis' intro with like the fog and stuff is cool and scary, but by this point you've seen so many dragons that it doesn't have as much of an impact. Borealis isn't much more than just a blue reskin of Exyx too, and you've fought other dragons, so you know how to fight Borealis. Fuck you, you bargain bin Godskin duo, and that's like being a knockoff Sonichu. For some reason, this fight is way harder than you'd think. He has this one move that can just straight up one-shot you with a big hitbox, but I don't find Vike that unfair. The thing is, he's just a dumbass, so just spam at him and he'll probably die eventually. This is the only Erdtree avatar different enough from all the others to warrant talking about separately, due to one single change. When you bring it down to half health, it fucking silver chariots into 2 Erdtree avatars. The difference between this and most other duo bosses is that you only need to kill one to actually win. So instead of the strategy being just kill one and do your best to ignore the other, you can be flexible to your target, which makes for a more engaging fight. This also isn't a horrible boss, and having to have 2 of, and its health isn't like astronomically high or anything. This is what Godskin Duo wishes it was. I love Commander Niall. This guy is the biggest Giga Chad you've ever seen. He has a peg leg that's actually a sword. The first thing he does in the fight is summon lackeys for you to beat, which shouldn't be all too difficult. But when they're dead, the real fight begins. Niall's strong attacks are infused with lightning and ice, which looks really goddamn cool and makes you feel really goddamn cool when you dodge them. Niall has no bullshit, like, at all. The only thing holding O'Neil back was the Scarlet Rot that saps your health way too quickly to keep up with. With Niall, all of O'Neil's flaws have been totally fixed. The arena is smaller, meaning you're forced to engage, but not too small that Frostbite is unavoidable. Niall does big damage, but none of his attacks are unpunishable, and he cannot one-shot you out of nowhere. Niall's 10 in difficulty isn't because it's like the hardest fight in the game or anything, it's because he has the right kind of difficulty. I found myself in the classic Dark Souls dance in this fight more than any other. Fucking gorgeous fight. Bravo, Niall. You are an example to us all. It's very easy to just aggro one and not the other, which is good since nobody wants to fight 2 of these at once. The main problem with Theodorix is his obscene amounts of health. One attempt on this fight will take 5 to 10 minutes just because this thing is chunky enough to get Reddit gold twice over. My advice, bring as much bleed as you can. It has a high bleed resist, but it does enough of his health at once that if you apply it fast enough, it's worth it. This is a good example of a good boss with a massive health bar. Fire Giant gives you plenty of opportunities, time, and different methods of doing damage to him, such that it feels great whittling him down bit by bit rather than grueling like with the late game Deathrite birds. Everything I disliked about the previous Mog fight is better here. The area is nice and open, Mog has huge build-up, and is truly an intimidating threat. It's exceedingly difficult too. I like the physic thing too, although I wish you got more direction for that. As is, it's basically an unbeatable attack that can only be blocked by a resource in some random building that you may or may not have found. Yes, this boss is as hard as people make her out to be. Did I respec specifically to kill her as efficiently as possible? Well, that's between me, my mini-me, and Mogwin's Sacred Spear. Most of her moves are tighter than femboy ass, but it's still fair, although Waterfowl Dance is just bullshit. This boss serves as a very good, iconic, difficult boss, which FromSoft is famous for, and a vibe check for dumbasses. For this fight, in my first playthrough with the strength build, I mostly avoided damage with shields, but this fight forced me to dodge more and rely on my shield less, which helped carry over for future bosses. The second most heinous example of a duo boss behind only Crucible Knight and Crucible Knight Ordovis. The arena is really cramped, so most of the time you're going to be forced to fight them both at once, and both of their attacks coming at you at once is not physically dodgeable. Hell, one on their own is nearly impossible to not take damage on. Worse yet, these motherfuckers respawn until you've done whatever arbitrary amount of damage to both of them combined. Since the one revives other type of deal, you would think just killing them both at once solves the issue, right? Oh no, obviously. They respawn anyway if you do that, because why would you get rewarded for fighting the boss the more difficult method? That's fucking ridiculous! A strong contender for the coolest goddamn boss in the game. This boss sticks with the theme of having massive health bars, but pretty easy attacks. You only lose this fight by making a prolonged series of mistakes. Or just getting hit by its laser beam thing. The only bad part is the walk back to the boss, but that's not like too egregiously terrible. Ugh, this is the worst main story boss. The only reason he scored even this high is because the Beast Clergyman phase is somewhat tolerable. I highly recommend cheesing this one out. His attacks are too fast and he attacks too much. Since all of them fling him around like a fucking acrobat, he's nearly impossible to actually hit. And if you do hit, you're likely to get a trade. A trade is never worth it, since one hit from this asshat takes 75% of your health bar, and then some of them just cut off the end of it altogether. Incidentally, did you know that Malekith is extremely weak to Scarlet Rot? On an unrelated note, Mimic Tier's tendency to hold forwards and use their strongest shit means if you have Scarlet Aeonia equipped, and you summon a Mimic Tier right as the Beast Clergyman turns into Malekith, it'll probably just Scarlet Aeonia directly at Malekith and face tank his attacks, instantly rotting him and basically winning the fight automatically. I don't hate this boss, but it's not the greatest. Sometimes you cast just the right combination of spells that you can't dodge, and you just fucking die. Or sometimes you get in close for an extended period of time and the fight is over in a second. It's an annoying fight, but not unbearable. Also, you can just pretty much fucking kill him by just running up and using Inescapable Frenzy. Yet another example of a boss with an unnecessarily high health bar, and frankly, I'm sick and tired of these. You can't just pump up a boss's health and call it harder, especially with a fight like this. Godfrey and Horolu both have attacks with janky timings, hitboxes and dodge windows, which when combined with Godfrey's long combos and Horolu putting you through the fucking meat grinder, is not fun. Neither phase of this boss give you enough time to heal or reorient yourself until after an attack, and they just keep going and going and going and going until you finally manage to kill them. Another one of these annoying ass bosses that just do not stop attacking ever. Good fucking luck finding time to heal, because that hammer will be shoved so far up your ass you'll be puking Elden Stars for days. Nothing else about this boss pisses me off that much. I just wish this Weasley bitch would just sit still for 5 goddamn seconds. After a long string of mediocre to shit bosses, the Elden Beast is a perfectly serviceable final boss. Doesn't do insane damage, its health bar isn't pants-shittingly big, and it isn't as hyperactive as 7-year-old autistic ADHD me. As a colossal boss, it's not bad. The only quirk is the weird camera and the tendency to not have a clue what is that the hell is happening at any given moment. Solid finish.